Hello. Welcome to all my bold conservatives out there. Today we're going to be discussing the first set of Democrat debates, which was yesterday, and how they could not stop talking about how racist Republicans are, how racist conservatives are, and how racist Donald Trump is. Yet, the Democrats, all we see them doing lately is racist things. Get ready. This is the Bold Conservative Show.
We want to turn now to the issue of race in America.
We have got to take on Trump's racism.
We'll call his racism out for what it is.
The racial divide lives within me.
Environmental racism, economic racism, criminal justice racism, healthcare racism.
And racism, or crime or poverty, ended on my watch. But in our city,
That what Trump is doing through his racism
systemic racism has touched every part of American life.
and segregation and the institutional racism we see now
President Trump is pursuing a re-election strategy based in part on racial division.
We'll also sign into law Sheila Jackson Lee's reparations bill so that we can have the national conversation we have waited too long in this country to have.
If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars.
Black-white wealth gap in America.
Racial issues in
The racial divide lives within me.
$50 billion into historically black colleges and universities. Close the black-white wealth gap in America.
Systemic racism has touched every part of American life. If you walk into an emergency room and you are black, your reports of pain will be taken less seriously. If you apply for a job and you are black, you are less likely to be called just because of the name on the resume.
Majority of domestic terrorism cases this year have been motivated by white supremacy. In fact, the alleged shooter in this weekend's attack in Gilroy, California, referenced a well-known white supremacist book on social media. How are you going to combat the rise of white supremacy?
We need to call out white supremacy for what it is, domestic terrorism.
It's why I've proposed that we do everything from investing in historically redlined neighborhoods
Mayor.
to build black wealth in home ownership.
Thank you, Mayor.
To supporting entrepreneurship for black
Thank you very
Americans.
much.
We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with.
73% of African Americans are in favor of cash payments to black Americans who are descendants of slaves. How do you respond to them?
The wealth that we have built, the way we became the greatest country on the face of the planet, was literally on the backs of those who were kidnapped and brought here by force. The legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression is alive and well in every aspect of the economy and in the country today.
There was 250 years of slavery, followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism.
How are you going to combat the rise of white supremacy?
racism
Racial
Racism, racism, racism.
and racism,
segregation
On racial division, racial issues in
racial divide.
of slaves,
Slavery.
white supremacy.
As you saw in that video clip, that compilation of all the Democratic candidates for 2020, they could not stop using the word racist. They could not stop talking about racism, and they just kept going and going and going and going. They won't stop. But the Washington Examiner did a piece a couple of days ago talking about how the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, the House Democrats' powerful campaign arm, has just abruptly purged half a dozen staffers. Why? Because they are white. It appears that no one had anything against these particular staffers except for the color of their skin. Although roughly half the committee's full-time staffers, 13 of 27, were non-white. this was not enough for some Democratic members of Congress. They complained. DCCC chairwoman Sherry Bustos of Illinois had brought in too many white staffers when she won the position, and they put enough pressure on her that she sacrificed her loyal staffers to the god of diversity. Even if all those staffers ended up with cushy lobbying jobs as a reward for their loyalty, this is still a lot more shocking than people perhaps realize. There are two possibilities, interpretations of this mass purge at the DCCC. Either a few Democrats are making a racial issue out of a patronage question, once again knifing each other under the cover of intersectionality, or Democrats are genuinely angry that half the staff at the DCCC are white. As often happens with the Democratic left, it is difficult to tell just where the insincerity ends and the fantasism begins. So literally, you have the D in CCCCCC, well, however many C's there are, firing people simply because of the color of their skin. Imagine if the roles were reversed and the DCCCC or the Republican RNC started firing staffers simply because they were people of color. Imagine that. Imagine the shock waves, the sheer shock waves and the earthquakes that would take place if that were to happen.